Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Belmont Saga, Part 2, What chapter are we at? Chapter 6, The Blood Promise. And as in previous chapters in this part of the book, in All That Resists Him, this deep aside into Lord Stenstrom's background, these chapters are pretty short, so we'll probably move on to Chapter 7, The Woman in Grey. Last week, we see Lord Stenstrom's mother way before his birth, trying to blackmail his father, Lord Stenstrom the Older, into quitting the fleet and finding something else to do with his boots firmly planted on Cana. His mother, very domineering, very powerful in Tyrol sorcery, but able to be influenced by her friends, by gossip, by the things she hears. And then she hears how dangerous flying around in spaceships is, which is probably no great shakes, isn't probably far off the mark. If you're traveling around in a pressurized tin can, even though no matter how big and complex it is, that's still what it is. All kinds of horrible things can happen to you, no doubt. And she, being a very loving yet worrisome person, was worried for her husband. Like, I love this man. I don't want to see anything bad befall him, so I need him to quit the fleet, and in order to do that, I'm not going to give him anything but daughters and no sons until he accedes to my wishes. And so they go on and on for years and years, and eventually amass 29 daughters. And Lord Stenstrom, being a good dad, loves every one of them. And Lady Jubilee, being a good mom, also loves every one of them. And eventually Lord Stenstrom shows up due to arcane intervention. And as we see Stenstrom starting to grow up, he sees that his mother is firmly in command of the doings at Belmont Manor. Even though she's got 30 children, she manages to be equally disruptive in all of their lives. She's not abusive or anything like that. She's just pushy and is in everybody's business. If they do something she doesn't like, she will persuade them in various ways to change their methods. Many of his sisters would rise up against Mother every so often and then get smacked down. His sister Calamy was adept at running away, but his mother was equally adept at bringing her right back to the manor in a literal flash of smoke and a clap of thunder, and Stenstrom has no idea how this is being accomplished. And then his elder sister Constance, whom he has a great admiration for because Constance is old enough that she looks like an adult to him, yet she's young enough that she was still kind of like a kid, like she was still involved with him as he grew up. And she decides she'd had enough of Mother foiling her at every turn, so she was going to leave and go Carofab. She found out via the P2C6&7 spy network that prospective gentlemen would be out at the ruins of Caroline, and she decided to pretend to be a Caroline maiden and go out there and meet him. The P2C6&7 network, I got that from ballers.com. It's a website where prospective ladies, or men too, I guess, could find out what athlete is going to be where and when, and you can get yourself up, I guess, and try to hook up at various clubs or cocktail parties or wherever these athletes were hanging about. And that's where I got that. The P2C6&7's network's the exact same thing. They know this fad of hanging out at the ruins of Caroline is a big one, and all sorts of people head out there and sit in the moonlight. And if you know who's going to be there and when, you can plan your deception accordingly. Apparently it had a happy ending because Constance marries the man that she went out there to meet. So all that is well with that. Now we get into more of Stenstrom's formative years, and we're gonna find out. The question has been raised. Lord Stenstrom has a good pedigree, has lots of cash. His dad is a well-established captain in the fleet, and that's an important thing in the fleet. Familial ties, I guess nepotism, as you might call it, in the modern environment is a big deal. So Stenstrom should be a shoo-in to join the fleet, but he never did, and we're going to find out exactly why in this chapter, Chapter 6, The Blood Promise. So let's proceed immediately. Enough of my yapping about. Part 2, Chapter 6, The Blood Promise. Lady Jubilee was a smothering blanket, protecting Stenstrom from every harm and perceived threat she could. It could have been that Lady Jubilee, in her fearful mind, was seeing things that weren't there. She continued to see threats coming for her son left and right from the now incarcerated Lady Vendra. If Lady Vendra's hope was to create uncertainty, unrest, and panic in Lady Jubilee's mind, then she had succeeded. That had to be the most fiendish revenge of all. Under Jubilee's watchful gaze, Stenstrom grew into a strong boy, bright-eyed and eager to meet the world around him. Though he was several years younger than Virginia and Lyra, he was now fully able to keep up with them, his body and face only marginally addled with the childhood puffies. Lyra, a certified tomboy and self-proclaimed son of Belmont South Tyrol, at first resented Stenstrom, loudly denouncing him as a fraud and an intruder. However, as he began to show his prowess, Lyra warmed to her brother and accepted him as one of the guys. Stenstrom grew up in a virtual bubble, smothered by his fearful mother. All he knew was the confines of Belmont Manor and its adjacent lands. He rarely got to see the city hugging the coast to the north, and almost never was placed around children his own age. He knew his mother and father, his older sisters, Virginia and Lyra, and the house staff, and that was all. They were the only people inhabiting his lavish but rather small world. And one thing soon became very clear. Something his mother could not hold back. Stenstrom had inherited his father's love of adventure. He and his sister Lyra loved watching the vids and posts of bold men and women doing grand things. They thrilled to the stories of adventure and quest. They followed the exploits of the colorful vigilant from Rustum, the mad Lord of Walther, a man of apparent skill and power who took things into his own hands without waiting for the sisters to tell him to act. And they turned their gaze at the stars and all of the possibilities that were there. Using the Marian telescopes placed about the manor grounds, he and Lyra often gazed at the stars. They thrilled whenever they caught a glimpse of a fleet vessel in their viewfinder, watching it soar off to wherever. Looking up into the sky, there was freedom, a place where their fathers sailed. They made a wager between them as to which would become a fleet captain first, Lyra or Stenstrom. And there was the steady stream of gifts that flowed in. Pint-sized fleet coats, hats, leggings, boots, buckles, toy weapons, the works. Certainly gifts from his father in space, hoping that his son would want to follow him someday. There were models, too, of the Caroline, a proud Straylight-class warbird, the second to bear the name. There were the small toothpick models, large Duraplas ones, even hollow projections with controllers. Lyra and Stenstrom tore into them, putting the clothing on and marching about the manor like little captains, their hollow Caroline soaring through the halls. Lord Stenstrom's son and his tomboy daughter both had their hearts set on joining the fleet. Oddly, one summer when he was 9, Lyra stopped talking about joining the fleet and sailing the stars. She also stopped looking through the telescopes and wrestling with him in the sandpit. She began wearing gowns, something she'd always resisted. What had gotten into her, Stenstrom wondered. He didn't have long to find out. Snap! He had that dream again, of sand and something terrible jumping out of it. The dream of his sister staring at him open-mouthed. The dream of his terrified, screaming mother, "Belle!" Stenstrom the younger was roughly pulled from his sleep by several people dressed in black robes. What's this?" he said, trying to wake up. In the dark, he could see the fleet coat and hat he had been wearing before going to bed thrown over a chair. Even though he was only 9 years old, he was strong enough to wrestle Lyra full out and hold his own, though she was 5 years older. He struggled. A cloying mist was sprayed into his face. Immediately his strength drained away from him and he fell limp, though their faces were covered. He recognized a few of them as he was carried from his bed: Jen the maid, Lori the cook, and Lyra his sister. "Lyra? Sis," he managed to say. "Don't struggle, Belle," Lyra whispered. "Just relax. It's gonna be all right. I promise." Saying nothing further, they dragged him through the interior of the manor and out into the gardens and pebbled walks. A fire burned ahead. They entered a courtyard centered with a large fountain. A brass tripod was set up in front of the fountain basin, and a fire burned in the tripod's pot. Tending the reddish fire, fueled by various oils and fats, was a robed woman. He was thrown down to the pebbles. As he watched, the woman picked up a knife and plunged the curved blade into the fire. When the blade began glowing a rosy red, she pulled it out and approached. The woman was slight and plump, and her hair was a lilting shade of silver. It was his mother. It was Lady Jubilee. He was lifted up off the pebbles and carried before her. She held the sizzling knife up and let him see it. "We are not here to harm you, my beloved son," she said in a monotone, her voice amplified in the moonlight. "Rather, we wish to protect you, to save you from death. You will make a promise right now, a Tyrol blood promise. You will promise you shall never become an officer or a crewman in the Stellar Fleet. As you make this promise, I shall cut you with this knife. If you are true to your word and promise truthfully, you shall feel no pain, and you shall suffer no injury. Should you break this promise now or in the future, this wound shall burst open, and that shall be your end. I wish you suffer no harm, either by this knife or by the perils of the Stellar Fleet. I wish to save you, my son." She showed it to him again, curved and sizzling. "Are you ready?" Held in place, drugged, he could do nothing but meekly nod. Several hands undid his nightclothes and bared his chest. His mother then reached out and applied the knife to her son's chest. "Will you promise, Stenstrom, my only son, that you will never become a member of the Stellar Fleet, either as an officer or a crewman, as your father has been?" He looked down as far as he could. He felt no pain, but it looked to all the world that his mother had every bit of that sizzling knife plunged into his chest, right in the vicinity of his heart. "Do you promise?" she said again. In his chest he could feel the beginnings of heat and pain. "Yes, Mother, I promise, please." She moved the knife down the length of his chest, finally drawing it out near his belly button. He felt dizzy and fell to the pebbles, where his robed sister came to his side and helped pick him up. Jubilee took the knife and put it back into the fire. A line of robed figures emerged from the dark. They were carrying armfuls of bundled clothing, his fleet coats, hats, shirts, pants, everything. They threw them into the fountain's basin, making a little mountain. They also tossed in his models of the Caroline. His mother pointed at the pile, and it caught flames, the orange tongues of fire and smoke leaping up into the night, burning cloth and melting models. She watched the pile burn for a bit, then turned to him. "Now I can rest," she said, and kissed him on the cheek. "Lyra, take him back to his bed and stay with him through the night. I shall conclude the ritual here and join you in the morning. Watch over him and call for me should anything happen." Stenstrom was dragged back to his bed, where Lyra tucked him in and sat by his side. Through his window he could see the bonfire of all his stuff out in the garden. It was a rough night for him. Stenstrom developed a sickness, an unheard of thing for an elder. He sweated into a fever dream. How could Mother do this to me?" he stammered, sweating through his sheets. Lyra sat at his side and wiped his brow. "Because she loves you. It's her way of trying to keep you safe. You're not the only one who's had a knife plunged into your heart. She does that to all of us. And this won't be the last time you'll be put to the promise. No. As she finds things out, if you go off and do something she doesn't like, she'll drag you back out there again and add on to the blood promise. She'll update it. I've been out there 4 times already. My dreams, I wanted to soar like Father. And so did I." Her hand went to her chest. Lyra kissed him on the forehead, and they watched the fire. Both of their dreams turned to smoke. There's always ways around things, Belle. If you might not be what you were expecting or hoping for, but something's always just around the corner. You'll see. Stenstrom fell into a jumpy sleep, his sister sitting with him all night. Snap! Came his dream again, this time in a drug-induced nightmare. Snap! And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 6, The Blood Promise. So there it is. There it is. Stenstrom and his sister Lyra both dreamed of soaring the stars like their father did, of joining the fleet and letting adventure take them to wherever. They both wanted it badly, but Mother doesn't have much of an appreciation of the fleet and wanted her children kept as safe as possible. And she put them both to the blood promise, apparently plunging a knife into both of their chests at various times, making them promise that they will never join the fleet. And if they ever break that promise, the wound she applied to them will burst open and they will die. Whether this blood promise is a real thing or just a bit of sleight of hand trickery, it's hard to tell. Tyrol sorcery deals with a lot of sleight of hand, of misdirection, of magic, fake magic. But who knows? This promise could be real or it could just be a fake deterrent. In any event, his poor sister Lyra, who wanted to join the fleet every bit as much as he did, stopped wearing boys' clothes, started wearing gowns, started doing girl things after she was put to the promise. And now Stenstrom gets the same treatment, a knife apparently in his chest and all his dreams going up in smoke. So that's why he did not join the fleet as a crewman or an officer. But as you can see, he found a way around that problem by not joining the fleet as a officer or a crewman, but as a civilian. So seems to be a loophole his mother didn't anticipate. In any event, that'll be discussed further on in later chapters. So moving on, let's go to chapter 7, The Woman in Gray. And here's another very important moment in young Stenstrom's life. Let's proceed immediately. Part 2, chapter 7, The Woman in Gray. He had a small bundle of items laid out on his bed, change of clothes, some of his favorite mementos, and a few bites of food. He took the items and placed them in a small backpack. Stenstrom was taking a page out of his older sister's book. He was running away from home. His head full of strange, rebellious thoughts, he was determined to see something of the world, to set out on his own. This manor and its grounds was all he knew, his whole world. Yet, with the memory of the knife entering his chest, home began feeling confined and smothering. Home is where you can dream, and then have those dreams quickly taken away in a bit of oil and the soft glow of a fire. He was nearly finished packing. "What are you doing?" came a voice. He jumped out of his skin with fright. He whirled around. Standing in the open doorway was his sister Virginia. She was leaning in, holding a bowl of snacks with both hands. Her messy head of half pewter-lock hair made an interesting marbled streak patterns on her head. "You scared the life out of me," he gasped. "Well, sorry. What are you doing?" He returned to his work as she came to his side, still holding her bowl of food. "I'm leaving." "Why?" He felt a momentary sting, the knife in his chest. "Because I don't want to be here anymore." He finished packing and walked out of his room, Virginia following. Where are you going?" "The city." "And then what?" They spilled out into the night, the dewy grass crinkling under their feet. "Why are you plaguing me with questions? I'm going to the city, and then I'm going to vanish into it, just like the mad Lord of Walther." "The who? Aren't you at least going to say goodbye to Mother?" "Well, creation, no! Are you mad? How far would I get if she knew what I'm planning?" They reached the pebbled walk near the familiar Marian ruins, and Stenstrom turned south, his backpack slung over his shoulder. "What about Lyra? Don't you want to say goodbye to her? She's going to be upset." He hesitated. "Yes, but you tell her for me, sis. Tell her I love her and not to worry." Virginia looked sad. "Well, I love you, Belle." He gave her a hug, and she almost dropped her bowl. "I love you too, sis." He started walking south. "Well, Belle, you said you're going to the city, right?" "Yes," he said on the hoof. "Well, you're going the wrong way. The city is that way." She pointed to the north. Annoyed, he stopped, turned, and started walking north, moving past her as he did. "Well, I know that," he said. He moved down the walk, passing all the old haunts of his childhood, the places where he, Lyra, and Virginia played, and crested a low hill. Beyond, the coastline stretched out in the dark blues and pearly grays of night, heading northwest in a rocky curve. About a mile away, straddling the coast and the swampy interior, was a huddled, semi-lit collection of stony buildings, the southern proper of Tyrol. As he walked, the city unfolded in front of him in little stages, scattered buildings, a few outlying streets, all mostly dark under the moonlight. Looking back, he could see the manor sitting in the dale, lit up in cheery yellow window light. He could see his room from where he was standing. His bed was there, his toys, his sisters. All he knew was back there in a rectangle of yellow light. He had a sudden urge to go back. Overhead, a blinking vessel of some sort rumbled by, winged, lit up and whistling. It banked inland and disappeared, gone as quickly as it came. He was reminded of the fleet, of the stars, and of the knife in his chest. He turned back toward the dark mosaic of Tyrol ahead and continued. He eventually reached the outskirts of the city where the pebbled walk gave way to a wider cobbled street. The whole cityscape around him was relentlessly dark and deserted. The houses and other assorted buildings mostly lightless, without noise. The street he walked was deserted. He wondered in his child's mind why it was so dark, why he appeared to be the only living soul around. Shouldn't it be more lively? Shouldn't there be people? He looked up and the night sky appeared odd, littered with stars and unfamiliar constellations. He thought he heard something, a slight breaking of a twig or the stirring of a rock. He turned to see what had made the noise. Crouching near a small house on the other side of the street was a shape, like that of a small person, pushed up against the wall of the house. The shape sat there, looking at him intently. "Hello?" he said, surprised at the sound of his own voice, at the loudness of it. Testing his own courage, he walked across the street toward the figure. "What are you doing there?" he asked. The figure didn't move, and nor did it speak. As he neared, a storm of some sort, a sudden gust of wind mixed with grit and swirling debris, welled up from the house. Stenstrom coughed and covered his eyes. He gasped for air and quickly stumbled away from the house as fast as he could. After several steps, the cloud of wind and grit abated, and he could breathe. He looked back once and could clearly see a boiling ball of churned-up debris moving down the street away from him. The figure he'd seen hiding against the side of the house was gone. Astonished, he continued northward, shaken from his encounter with whatever it was. He approached a small park that was dark and partially wooded. He wanted to find some place to sit down, to consider his poorly thought-out escape attempt. He hadn't expected the world to be so dark and lonely, so full of strange winds and unusual stars. He didn't know what to make of the world. He wandered into the park to gather his wits. He found a large statue of a fox, carved in a cat-like sitting position, its head pointed upward to gaze at the sky. Sitting next to the statue, he saw the slight figure of a slender woman. "Hello?" he asked, remembering his encounter with the thing near the house. Could this person be real? The woman slowly lifted her head. "Good morning," she said quietly, her voice inflected with an odd accent. "What is a little boy like you doing out all alone at this hour? Please come here." The woman was sitting on a small bench to the left of the fox statue. It was difficult to see in the dim moonlight, but she appeared to be wearing a gray lady suit of some sort, with a knee-length skirt. Her slender legs were crossed, and she wore a pair of button-up boots. Her face was thin, with a pair of thoughtful eyes and a pointy chin. A large, flat-brimmed hat sat next to her on the bench. She appeared frail and slightly bent She looked at him. "Why are you out here all alone?" "I'm running away from home," he said. Having had little contact with strangers and having been taught to never lie, it didn't occur to him not to answer the woman truthfully. It also didn't occur to him not to be completely trusting. "So, your mother does not know where you are?" "I don't think so." "Well, that's the whole point." The woman reached into the lining of her suit. She appeared momentarily saddened. She pulled her hand back out. She was holding a knife. Stenstrom stared at it in horror. "I'm so sorry," she said. "You're such a handsome young fellow. I see so much of your father in your face." He backed away. What are you going to do with that knife?" he stammered. I'm going to kill you with it," she said, standing up. "I've been waiting for you a long time to come walking down that road. Please, do not make this any harder than it has to be. I truly do not wish to make you suffer any more than is necessary." He turned to run. The park was alive with shapes. Men all around emerging from behind trees, and they were dirty and mangy. They looked to him like the vids of sailors and pirates he and Lyra liked to watch. "There's no place for you to go," the woman said, walking toward him. She raised the knife over her head. "Again, I'm so sorry." He backed up against a tree. The woman approached, the knife gleaming. Thinking fast, Stenstrom changed his tactics. He ran to her and put his arms around her thin waist. Please don't hurt me." The woman hesitated. I remember holding you when you were just a little baby. All those chubby cheeks, those wonderful bright eyes. I couldn't do it then. I should have, but I didn't. And now here we are. You needn't do this. What have I done to deserve this?" Her free hand came down and lifted his chin. "You haven't done anything. This is a closed circle we're trapped in, and there's no way out of it. I'm sorry." She reared back, the knife gleaming. Something appeared next to him in a cloud of black veils. Something breezy kissed him on the cheek. "No!" Stenstrom rose in a gasp. He was in his bed, his room smothered in a layer of night mixed with starlight. He was in his pajamas. His toys were neatly arranged in the corner. There was no lonely road, no fox park, and no woman in gray. Through the window he recognized the usual constellations that came out this time of year. All seemed normal. He lay back and pulled the sheets up to his chin. What a terrible nightmare. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 7, The Woman in Gray. A lot of things going on in this chapter. We meet some characters that we will have dealings with throughout the rest of the book and the following book, Against the Druries. Though it might not seem apparent, but that's the case. We met a number of characters. We met the Lady in Gray, first and foremost, and who appears to be Lady Vendra of Cone, released from the sisters' captivity now years later, and now her health seems somewhat compromised. She seems frail and bent, and she is there to kill Stenstrom again. Killing him would probably hurt Lady Jubilee the most, but she appears remorseful, like she doesn't really want to kill him, to hurt him, but her need for revenge is so severe and so potent that she's going to kill this little boy just to get revenge, but her heart doesn't seem to be in it. And that hesitation caused her to fail, to lose her chance to kill him. Something happened to him. In assuming what happened was not just a nightmare, but something happened to him to pull him away from this dire encounter at the Fox Park. And if you're wondering what's up with the Fox Park, foxes were sacred animals of the elders before the elders passed into memory. That the Vith used to use foxes to speak to the elders, to converse with them, and now foxes are considered sacred. So all throughout Cana, every city has a fox park with a little statue of a fox gazing up at the stars. But this fox park seemed a little weird. Things didn't seem quite right. The constellations weren't right. And there's a very real reason for that, and we've already had the reasoning for it answered in the earlier part of the book, but I'll refrain from bringing that up until later. Why everything looks so odd, there's a very real reason for it, that for a topic that we've already been familiarized with to some extent, but we'll hone in on that later. Something, assuming this happened at all, something zapped him right back home to Belmont Manor, and that will become apparent later as well. So a lot of cool stuff happened. A lot of characters were introduced, though it might not seem apparent now. Be cognizant of the characters that come and go, and one of them in particular that we see was introduced to the young Lord Stenstrom in this very chapter. In any event, that's it for tonight. Next week, Chapter 8, The Mad Lord of Walther. So we've been hearing about this guy, this vigilant from the east. Basically, he's kind of like a superhero. He can do a lot of cool things that most other people can't. He's a vigilant, which means he takes the law into his own hands, which is generally frowned upon, but sometimes you can get away with these things. And the Mad Lord of Walther is one of them. So we will see what he's all about next week. How long of a chapter is that? 1, 2, yeah. I see. That's that's a long enough chapter. It'll probably just be by itself. But we're making good progress into part 2 of the book. All that resists him. We're past a quarter of the way through. Yeah, there's 28 chapters in this middle part of the book, so we're up to chapter 8. So we're getting there. We're making progress. In any event, until next week, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.